Howdy doody, my little potatoes. How y'all doing today? So I wanted to make a video where I discussed some of the stuff that's been going on in the news recently, namely with the recent events that have taken place here in the U.S. with the recent mass shootings in Dayton and El Paso, and the response that is being elicited towards video games. So I want to start this off by saying, if you're someone who actively plays video games or is like under the age of like 45, I'm 95% sure I don't need to tell you that video games are not the root problem in America. They are not the source of violence. This video isn't being made for you. What I want this video to do is ultimately serve as a jumping on point for an actual discussion that I think we need to have with people in our lives. And ultimately, I think that discussion needs to be, something that you can just start by sending someone this video. Whether, you can send this video to someone who you think or believes that video games are making America more violent. Because again, this is about starting a conversation with people who have different beliefs and not trying to convert them, but trying to understand them. I know a lot of people just immediately jump to that, point of view where they get all angry and they're like, ugh, can't believe this, more boomers getting mad over video games. But I want to reiterate that that's not always necessarily the case. Sometimes people have good reasons to believe these things. And this video is ultimately to start a conversation with those people. I want to understand why it is they believe the things that they believe. So you can still watch this video if you are 100% steadfast in your belief that video games are not a problem in America. I mean, you can still watch it and add to the discussion in the comments if you want. If you don't want to, that's also fine. But, so yeah, I encourage you to send this video to people who maybe have a different viewpoint. So, with that out of the way, hi. I'd like to talk about what's been going on in America, because Jesus Christ, do we have a problem. For those of you who don't know, because you either A, don't live in America, or B, don't really pay attention to the news, which I think you should. I don't want to shame you if you don't, but I'm just saying I think it helps to be informed, so maybe you should pay attention to the news. But for those of you who don't know, recently, America was hit in both Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas. In the same day, we had 2 mass shootings. And I want to say that my condolences go out to the families of the victims and to those who survived and to those who have to deal with the trauma of what's been going on. I'm really sorry. Words will not express what you're going through. And I'm sorry that there's nothing I can say to make this better. I'm really sorry. I want to just say that things are going to be okay, that, it's going to work out, I know it. But deep down, I think we all know that shit like this just shouldn't happen. Shit like this should have never happened. So, with that out of the way, let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of this. So, are video games making Americans more violent? It's an honest discussion that I really hate that we have to have every couple years, but we do. Listen, we have this conversation, like, literally all the time. Like, we have these conversations, and ultimately the Supreme Court multiple times has come to the decision that no, violent video games should not be banned because they don't inherently make you violent. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But essentially, I just want to talk to the people who think differently from me because I want to understand their viewpoint. So I'm going to do what most commentators did back in the day. Even though I don't want to be a commentary channel, I kind of have to for this video, and I'm going to play a video game and talk over playing the video game. So I want to illustrate my point that video games are not all inherently bad, because that there seem to be these two arguments that are going on, and people are getting them mixed up. there's the first argument that say that video games are inherently bad for you. They are terrible, terrible things that only encourage horrible behaviors and just bad thoughts all around. So, while playing a game that is all about relaxing and mining and building things and, making a farm, doing whatever, I'm going to play this very relaxing game so I don't have to talk about that argument. Because just looking at the screen, you can see, well, look at this game. Do you really think this game elicits a lot of violence out of people? So that's ultimately not a concern for me. What I do want to talk about is the argument about specifically violent video games. So it needs to be said, do violent video games have an effect on people? Do they make you more violent? Because it would only make sense if you did, right? Because, a lot of us like to leap on to the fact that, oh, well, there have been violent movies in the past, there have been violent books in the past, but you don't have that level of interactivity. At least that's the logic going into this, right? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the logic seems to be for a lot of people, well, sure, we had these in the past, but you're interactive now. You're the one behind the gun. You're the one being the super soldier. And this is none more apparent than in one of the shooter's manifestos, where he claimed he was going to live out his super soldier fantasy. That's a pretty big red flag, because I feel like most people see that and go, yikes, let's not do that. And if, you can sit down and you can have the argument, well, super soldiers exist in all forms of media, but in what other form of media do you get to play as the super soldier? So I understand that argument. However, there have been multiple studies that have all come back saying, no, video games do not make you inherently more violent. No matter how much you play, video games do not make you inherently more violent. That is the big takeaway here, is that is just false. That is a, incorrect notion made by people who were just making assumptions. And again, I don't blame them for that, because it would make sense, Like, I guess if you think about it long enough, you're like, well, if my kid is playing whatever violent game, then odds are they're going to be a little more violent, right? Again, it's completely understandable. But the difference comes in the practical application of it all. So I want to talk about some studies that have been held somewhat recently, I believe. I haven't done a lot of effort into making this video since this is more of a rant, so I probably won't be able to find the video before I upload this, or the research before I find this, but there have been studies showing that violent video games actually prevent violent outbursts in people. Now I know what you're thinking, that's kind of whack. Why and how, what? And the reason is because it lets people live out their fantasies, and in a lot of games, show them the consequences of those fantasies. So let's talk about the Grand Theft Auto series, right? A game where, the game developers basically made a real world, a living world, and just told their players to go ape shit. They were like, hey, go do what you want, right? Which is a cool concept. And it allows people who are inherently, thinking about doing these things, they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be so cool. Not only do they get to actually vent all their frustrations out in a game like that, where they can't hurt anyone, but it also has helped people identify that they might have they might have anger issues, or they might have some deep-lying issues and they need to go to, some kind of therapist. Which is important and kind of essential, is if these can help you identify that you have a problem and you need to go seek counseling, I think the best way to do that is to let you just go wild in a game and realize, I have these violent behaviors in this game. Should I be concerned about this if this is all I ever want to do? So there's that angle you can take, and then there's also the angle of that sort of stress relief. When I get really stressed or really angry, I pop in Smash Brothers, and I sit down and I beat up a CPU, because I'm not very good at the game. And sometimes, when I'm stressed, that's just what I need to do to wind down. I just need to play a game I know I can win, and have fun, okay? So it's sort of the same thing. It's the same argument when it comes to games like GTA. You know, you can definitely have these more violent outbursts in people, perhaps, if you think about it, but when you really look into it, people are probably just living out the desire to be a super cool criminal who never gets caught and can do all these crazy stunts in cars and stuff, and it's fun. But nobody actually wants to do stuff like that. I've never met a person who's played GTA and has been like, dude, after playing the most recent GTA game, I gotta say, I think I'm gonna steal a car. Like, you know, nobody thinks about that because they're just like, yeah, this is just like a weird wish fulfillment thing. It's a power fantasy. That's fun, you know? And that's great that this gives people an outlet to live out these fantasies because now they don't have to be a danger to society. So that's a positive. And also, everyone acts like in violent video games or games with the option to be violent, that's the automatic route that everybody goes down. I'm sorry, but if you spend like any amount of time on the internet, one of the most common relatable gamer posts you'll ever see is the people being like, does anyone else follow the traffic laws in GTA lol XD? Like, people play these games because they're fun, not because they're violent and they're violent people. Playing games does not inherently make you violent, and playing violent games does not inherently make you violent either. But there's still this big concern about it, and it's like, well, you know, I'm worried, you know? And I understand that there's a concern about this because, yes, violence in America is rising, and it's terrifying. America is kind of going through a really gross thing right now, and we're having a whole lot of arguments. And I feel like I need to weigh in on this, because I've already made my statement. Video games do not make you inherently violent. There have been tons of studies on this. We literally had this conversation in the 90s multiple times, and multiple times the Supreme Court said, no, they do not make you inherently more violent. Hell, after the only real time you could say that the people won against the video games was when the Supreme Court was like, hey, can you guys make a rating system for video games? And the video game industry was like, aight, we'll make a rating system. That way kids and parents don't get confused. Which then comes into the other argument, is if you feel like your kids are being influenced by violent video games, here's a reminder, why don't you parent them? You know? If your kid's playing games that you feel are too violent for them and too mature, there's a reason that we have this rating system. It's pretty straightforward. It's E for everyone, E10 plus is everyone 10 and up, T for teen, and M for mature. So if your kid isn't over 17, don't let them buy mature games if you don't feel that they're mature enough to handle any of the themes within the games. Because believe it or not only do they have a rating letter, but on the back of the box, and usually on the front of the box, they say, hey, here's why this game is rated this way. So you can be an informed consumer. That's pretty great. That's really handy. So there's no excuse for you to say that, oh, my kid just, I can't get him to stop playing these violent video games. If you bought him that game, that is on you. It was your job to parent. Like, obviously your kid's going to want to play whatever popular game is out right now, and sometimes those games can be a little violent. That's understandable because sometimes really fun games happen to have violent aspects to them. I'm personally not a huge fan of Grand Theft Auto, but I can acknowledge that they're fun. To just screw around and do stuff, it's a lot of fun. But that doesn't make me want to go do those things in real life. So that comes into my point. Parent your kids. It seems like a really simple request, and yet people don't really do it. So, what else is there to say? If you don't want your kid playing a certain type of game, don't let them play that type of game. It's as simple as that. You can't say that you didn't know that a game would have these things in them because they're on the back of the box. They're on the front of the box too, in a lot of cases. There's no argument to be made that the video game companies are lying to you and are trying to trick your children into playing these violent games, because they aren't. And I know a lot of people like to get up in arms about the fact that there are violent video games. And I want to remind you, there are violent movies and violent books. Like, what? You want to get rid of video games because there are violent aspects to them, but again, there are violence in movies and books. So what, are you going to get rid of books and movies too? Well, no, because again, it goes back to this argument, well, you're not in control during all those. And I hate to break it to you, but you're not really in control in violent video games. I'm sorry, but there's no way in hell that me holding a controller is the equivalent to me holding a gun. Pressing one button on a controller to fire a gun is very different from the actual complicated steps of learning to fire and reload a gun in real life. Like, that stuff's hard, man. I can barely reload airsoft guns, okay? There's no way in hell that a video game would teach me how to reload. It's not happening. So, there you go. Dismantled that argument. You know, and the other thing is, it's like, if you have a problem with violent video games, don't buy them. You don't need to. You know? There are violent things that exist, and there are a group of people who are like, oh, let's burn the violent video games. Hi, freedom of speech. And in 2011, the Supreme Court was like, hey, you can't just ban violent video games. That's against the First Amendment. They are art, and they are protected by the First Amendment. So, congratulations, baby. You've done it. But to get a little bit more spicy in here, let's talk about the actual root problems behind our situation. Now, I am not a deeply political person. I never really consider myself to be. I don't find myself the most informed person a lot of the time, except when something really piques my interest. That's when I start investigating and looking for solutions. Looking for solutions to, one problem or another. And in this particular case, when it comes to gun violence, I thought to myself, okay, so what can we do to improve this? What can we do to make this situation better? And I gotta tell you, it's kind of a crazy thought, but I think I found the answer. And the answer is, don't let people buy assault rifles. I'm sorry, but I can understand a hunting rifle, okay? I can understand a handgun. Handgun, self-defense. You know what? Absolutely. I'm not talking about getting rid of the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment was made to protect people, not to protect guns. So that's like the first and most important step here, is we're not getting rid of the Second Amendment. What we are getting rid of is civilian access to weapons of war. And you can make the argument that any gun is a weapon of war, and while that's technically true, I don't mind people having handguns for self-defense, mainly because you can't take a handgun into a school and go end the lives of 30 students in under a minute. There's no way that you can cause the same amount of carnage with a handgun that you can cause with an assault rifle. I think shotguns are a lot more of a complicated case because people use shotguns in hunting, so it's like a bit of a moral gray, so I think we need to find a balance with the types of shotguns we allow people to wield. And most importantly, I think hunting rifles are okay because, again, it's really hard to cause a lot of carnage with a hunting rifle. Sure, you can, don't get me wrong, you can cause carnage if you have the intent to do so. And that's what's kind of messed up, is that there are people who are going to find a way around any type of roadblock we try and put in the way to protect people. That's just the world we live in. That's the reality we live in, right? But this situation could be solved, or at least, made a little bit better, if you just don't let people have the same weapons we allow the military. I'm sorry, I don't think that we need to have any of that stuff. I'm personally not really an avid hunter. Right? Hunting's not something that I, do. My grandfather loves it, and, good for him. He's having fun with it. And I think I would probably enjoy it to an extent, too. The idea of trekking through nature and just doing stuff sounds great. I'd love to go hunting with my grandfather. But at the same time, I don't want it to be a trophy hunting thing. You know what I mean? So I have very mixed opinions on hunting as a whole. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm still okay with the fact that we allow people to have hunting rifles. Because even though I personally am not a big fan of the idea of trophy hunting, I can acknowledge that it is something people do for sport, and it is something that people enjoy doing, and so we shouldn't just take that away from them. And again, that's part of the Second Amendment, is protecting people, and that's why I think we should allow handguns. And again, same goes with shotguns. I think we should have very specific limitations and regulations on the shotguns we allow people to have, but ultimately I think they can still be allowed because they can be used for protecting people. Okay? And the final thing I want to touch on with this incident, and I don't want to come off as a angry Democrat or an angry Republican, because I'm really not. Like I said, I'm not really political. If I had to identify with a party, I wouldn't. I'd say that I'm pretty independent because I think the party system is inherently flawed. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, first of all, because it's coming from someone who probably doesn't know as much as the people who are actually in power, but can still give a concise opinion. And also take it with a grain of salt because it's mixed both Democratic and Republican ideas. So, without further ado, my big crazy reveal is I don't think Trump should be in office. I think that whether he realizes it or not, he is enabling people to do these types of things. I want to call back to an interview Trump had, I believe it was on the Today Show, where he said he was upset that we were fighting a very politically correct war, and that the terrorists pretend not to care about their families, but they really do, so we should be taking out the families of terrorists. I want that to sink in for a second, because when you look at it from the viewpoint of winning a war, yeah, that makes sense. If you take hostages and force them to cause the other side to surrender, if you start hurting people that your enemies care about, yeah, from a war standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, that is a wise decision. However, from a moral standpoint, we're no better than the terrorists, because that's what they're doing. They are taking innocent people hostage. They are taking the lives of innocent people who aren't involved in any of these situations or shenanigans. So, tell me, Donald, how are we any better if we're not fighting, as you call it, a politically correct war? Because it's not a politically correct war. It's a morally just war. Now, is any war 100% morally just? No. But I think we're fighting the most just war we can. Are we going to make mistakes and do things that are unjust? Absolutely. Have we hurt innocent lives? Absolutely. But I think more times than not, we have done the right thing. I cannot fathom why it is that you think we should be taking out the families of our enemies. It's rhetoric like that that encourages people to go after innocent people. With the stuff that happened in Dayton and El Paso, it would not surprise me if the shooters had been influenced by Trump and were like, you know what, these people probably aren't as patriotic as me, they probably support the Muslims and the terrorists and the blah blah blah, so I'm going to take them out to hurt the terrorists. I'm going to do as Trump said and take out the families of these terrorists. Because at the end of the day, rhetoric like that does affect people. We often talk about how it's a mental health issue, right? And while I don't always 100% agree that these things are mental health issues, if we're going to stake the claim of it's a mental health issue, then we also need to hold accountable the people who are influencing these people who are clearly unstable. Because I don't think this is 100% a mental health thing. I think this was a terror attack at the end of the day. But if we want to talk about how at least one of the shooters had mental issues because his ex-girlfriend was like, that's how we met, was through our challenges in overcoming mental illness, that was how we met. So we know at least one of them had a mental illness. But that doesn't immediately mean that that is the root cause, is that, that's what made them so dark. Because it's a culmination of things. Hate to break it to you, but people with mental illnesses don't just snap and murder people one day. Trust me, it's really not something you see all that often. So in this type of situation, I fail to see how mental illness is solely at play here and solely at fault for the situation we're in. Because it's not. Ultimately, my point is, we need to be careful about the rhetoric we say, because what our public officials say have an effect on the people. They have an effect on the greater culture and the greater understanding that people have and the beliefs of people. And if we let rhetoric like take out their families fly in this country, yeah, it's no wonder that we have these issues. So, before I go, I realized there was one more thing I wanted to talk about with the whole gaming situation, because I realized that there is another point that people have, and that's that, well, why else would America have so many, violent problems if gaming isn't, if gaming isn't the cause? Why these violent outbursts? Gaming is a big part of American culture. You know what else? It's a big part of British culture and the rest of Europe's culture and a lot of other cultures, and yet they don't have nearly as many mass shootings as we do. Trust me, I don't think that most politicians genuinely 100% believe that video games are the root cause of this. I think a lot of politicians just believe that they need to get all the load off their back, and so are finding any scapegoat that they can, and they're looking back on historical scapegoats and going, I mean, yeah, we can play video games, it's fine. It's been 20 years since we did it last, and no one will notice. We noticed. Trust me, we noticed. So ultimately, my point here is, please, for the love of all things in this universe, if you are suffering from mental health issues, if you feel like you're going to hurt yourself or people around you, seek counseling. I know that it's scary to admit that you might have a problem, that you might need help, but trust me, it is going to be so much better in the long run if you acknowledge it. If you see warning signs that someone might need help, you see warning signs that someone might be going, down the deep end, please contact the authorities. I know that seems messed up and you don't want to ruin this person's life, but you have to understand, if things progress to a point where it gets real bad, it isn't just going to be their life anymore that's on the line. Ultimately, this is a very dark subject. I don't like talking political on this channel. I like to keep things lighthearted and wholesome, but I feel like this needs to be said, because if this video is going to, have as any message at all, it's going to be, please don't find a scapegoat, especially not video games, because I hate to say it, but video game players are a vocal majority in this country and outside the world. People who play video games and don't have violent outbursts and aren't inherently violent people are going to have something to say if you start blaming our favorite hobby or a favorite pastime or something we make a career out of. If you start blaming that for all the violence in this country, things are not going to end well. I'm serious. You're going to have serious problems on your hand, So, please don't blame video games. In fact, be very introspective about the situation at hand. What could we have done as a country to help these shooters not become shooters? Is there anything we could have done, or are they destined to be like this forever? Those are questions that honestly plague me a lot, and I'd love to know the answer to. But with that, I think I want to wrap this up. Thank you all for watching me sit down and play Minecraft for however long this video is. And yeah, I've had a lot of fun these past few months working on content, and I'm excited to put out the next 2 JoJo videos, which are, coming soon, relatively speaking. So, anyway, without further ado, that's going to be the end of this video. As always, y'all should be drinking your water, and I hope that you have a damn good one.